Raw return, he watched weather move the way some people watched their own hands at work, with a patience that felt like belonging. The spare room had been a nursery once, then a storage pit, then his. He set the small desk against the wall so he could see the window and the screen without having to choose. A salt lamp threw its soft orange into the maps. The county looked like a slice of bread under a winter heat lamp. He liked the glow. Light like that did not glare at a person or insist it knew better than cloud. He kept an old chair that had decided long ago which squeaks it would make and would not be corrected. On the desk he lined up things that did not need to be in a line except for the way a line steadies a room. The pocket notebook where he wrote with a stub pencil, a roll of tape, a snack he would forget to eat, a small bulb thermometer that minded the mood of the house better than its temperature. The spare room window looked over the front yard and the curving ribbon of sidewalk that failed to stay a straight line around the block. Beyond, the lake showed itself only in a brightness above the roofs where the trees fell back and the sky got wide. It began with a return blooming where the lake met the highway. He watched the loop of an old radar that had lag built into its bones and preferred a map so plain that even a casual person would call it out of date. At midnight on the first night, nothing asked for names, just that small blossom on reflectivity. A flower opening and closing against common sense. It slid south along the shore and then ran like a stitch across town. Toward the little industrial river nobody swam in on purpose. Before dawn it was gone. Like a printer test page, a machine runs when it needs to remind itself of green. The next night the return came again, just as he knew it would. He kept his hands off the keyboard to let the map have its say. The bloom centered roughly on his neighborhood and began to cage itself in a soft circle. He watched the line turn, as a compass does in the hands of a boy who could not keep from testing it. 2 blocks narrower, he thought, though he did not say it aloud. The public feed smoothed the return as noise. Polite as a county losing its taste for weather in the old way. But the raw reflectivity, the stuff not rinsed for a general mouth, kept a fine thread like pencil on cheap paper. On that thinness, the circle came again and learned its shape. He went outside. The wind was still. Chimes did not move. The birch trees by the porch lifted their smallest leaves to hear and then laid them back down as if the question had been too much work. The streetlight hummed its old cabin of a hum. Somewhere a truck practiced the saving of gears. He came back in and watched the little yard station he had taught to live on the side fence. The barometer logged gentle pulses every half-minute. A slow breath, moving through something larger than the house but not showing itself to the trees. The anemometer on the fence post clicked 3 times between 2 and 3, and then was quiet for the rest of the night, as if shamed by its own mischief. He had learned enough to be careful with curiosity. He knew how a room can be taught to treat its keeper badly if he insists on an answer. Still on the 3rd night, when the track tightened by the same 2 blocks in the little pencil line, darkened as if a hand had pressed harder, he taped a tiny sand to a helium balloon and walked it onto the porch. He had meant to do that for years and never had a proper excuse. The balloon looked foolish in the dark, the kind of cheerful thing that belongs at a cheap party. He let it go as the echo passed. The data came back wrong in the way a story does when a child offers it too fast. Temperature rose with height. Humidity fell to nothing above the roofline and then climbed as if the sky had a floor set just above his shingles. He stared at the chart as if it might confess, lying. He tapped the screen with the pencil and then he put the pencil down because tapping is not science and because a pencil does not deserve being used to scold. At dawn the street was dry except for a wet band across his lawn, curving as if it meant to close around the block, but had grown tired of the idea. The wet looked clean, not the leak, and not dew. It was as if a large, careful machine had been rolled across the grass to level it, and had decided against touching any other yard. The line passed under his window and over the porch steps with a care people, save for a sleeping child. He laid a palm to the wet and found it was just water. He knew the difference by smell between lake and tap and rain and the old kind of snow that arrives early and has not yet learned how to be proper snow. This was none of those, or it was all of them in a mix that did not hire any one smell to be its boss. On the 4th night, the loop tightened to a spiral. Its last turn rested over his house. The smoke alarm chirped once and went back to sleep with the proud innocence of an appliance that has done its duty. E log d'Italiano barometer steady. Windows quiet. The radar did not watch him. It watched an idea of a place which contained his house. That should have comforted him. It did not. Near half-past to the house exhaled. The sound was small. Papers lifted as if a person had brushed them with the back of a hand. On the screen, the storm halted. If it had been a storm, the eye fixed. Right here. The map stopped being map and tried to be mirror. He had to look away to realize that looking had stopped working the way he had been taught to use it. He stood and recognized the way a man gets to his feet so as not to hold fear in his lap. The room did not change shape when he stood. The salt lamp kept its orange. The spare bed sat with its old quilt like a patient animal. He picked up the meter that had never lied out of pettiness and held it near the window. The needle held to itself, as if conserving energy for a later honesty. He stepped closer to the glass and put his breath on it to find the cold. The pain gave him back his own warmth. The lawn showed its wet band in the old curve. Not thickening, not closing. He told himself what he always told himself. When an unkindness threatened to become majestic, hold the ordinary in your mouth until it tastes like bread. He went back to the chair and watched. Every minute or so, the house let out that shallow breath that lifted receipts and took a fine layer of dust off the top of the salt lamp and sent it to learn the edges of the window. The radar fixed on the house and made a little crown of returns around the block. He moved the map in and out until the county forgot itself and the little blank circle of the lake turned into a smudge. The eye did not care which scale he chose. It enacted being centered without needing the performance of zoom. No one else would see it. The public feed did not show the return except as a comfortingly bad bit of noise. He knew his neighbors, and they would have found, if they had looked at his screen, a reason to talk about interference. He thought briefly of calling the radio friend who used to meet him on the 2-lane outside town to tune into a Storm-S voice. He did not call. What kindness is there in involving another mouth once a room has started its careful breath? He slept in the chair, which was a lie. He let the chair keep him upright while he waited for the kind of fatigue that does not rely on clocks. When morning did the thing morning does, making world look like it had always held light if only you had bothered to find it. The spiral was gone. The lawn held no new wet. The deck smelled like wood and old ash. He went out and scraped a nail under the steps where water had dried in a neat arc. The dirt held together like cake, then fell back into being dirt. He told himself he could go to work, or if not to work, then to the small errands that let a town reward a man for being alive. He washed a bowl and set it in the rack. He checked the spool of tape. He charged the little yard station space unit, though it did not need it. He felt the quiet inside the house as a bucket feels its emptiness without needing you to tell it a number. The nights after that were smaller in their oddness. The return came on radar and stayed in the thin pencil world he had set aside from the general belief system. The spiral learned not to finish its business. The wet barely touched the porch. The smoke alarm kept its policies. The barometer wrote its calm line. He still saw the house breathe. He kept a list of those breaths in the pocket notebook, until the act of writing them down felt like he was helping the anomaly learn his language. He stopped writing. He waited. On a Sunday, which is a day the town likes to be considered honest, the loop did not appear. He let relief visit. He watched a cooking show without sound and let the subtitles guess poorly at a womaness's mouth. He stood in the kitchen and tied a clean towel through its loop. When he returned to the spare room, he put his poems on the desk and for the first time in days allowed himself to look away from the map and into the glass of the window as a person looks into a window when they do not want to see themselves. The art showed normal, which is another way of saying it. Showed the collection of details a person accepts without filing. The small piles left by birds. The hose asleep under the porch table. The muddy place at the end of the path where gravel had given up pretending to be the correct top layer. The absence of oddness made noise, though it would be a foolish man who told a neighbor that the absence of an odd thing had been the loudest thing the house had done. He kept the world company at his level. He took the trash out because the schedule had asked. He stopped at the edge of the driveway because a small breeze pushed at his chest with the gravity of a sleeping animal's breath. He waited there like a person letting a cat pass under a hand, not petting, not withdrawing. The breeze went back to the kind of air counties buy in bulk for their citizens. It went back in. He straightened the pens. He opened a tab of a site that reported lake level as if it were a gossip. Lively, but decent. The lake had not done anything a lake would have been punished for in history. That calmed him only a little. When the loop returned the next night, it arrived with the neatness he hated. The Spyro found its old path, slipped one turn tighter, and then made a decision. He watched the decision as one watches a friend put his hand on a hot stove again. Near the middle of the night, the house exhaled hard enough to move a hair that had decided to live under his keyboard. The salt lamp's glow thinned and then took itself back as if embarrassed. The eye on the screen went from object to place. If he raised or lowered the scale, the eye gave back exactly the size of his house, not the area around it. His house. He moved the map with 2 fingers until he was looking at an empty beige with a circle drawn there. It was not cartography. It had learned his roofline. He wanted to be angry and could not find the owner of anger. No agency had done this to him. No neighbor had been careless with a tool. The house did not deserve correction. He resisted the childish instinct to unplug things so that the house would be clear of excuses. He took his palms off the desk and put them on his thighs and felt the cheap cloth of his pants offer their honest stillness in reply. He stayed very still, and the house made a hue and scale breath, and then another. He began to notice changes in the day, even when the map pretended to keep itself in the back of his life. The light through the blinds learned a tempo. You could set a piece of paper under it and watch the bars of shadow pass in a rhythm. You would not want to explain to anyone you hoped would stay in the room. The kettle made its little metallic complaint when it decided to be watered, and then quit, complaining the second the steam had taught the metal its place. The refrigerator had always been a faithful liar about its own age. Now its cycling kept the same polite half-minute as the pulses on his fence station. He told himself that once you know the number of a thing, you begin finding it everywhere. Then he told himself he should not be giving these motions a number even in his head. He told himself many things. He arranged them in a neat column and did not believe any of them enough to lay a coin on the top. He took the sand out again and suffered the same wrong sky. Warmer when high, dry above the roofline, then wet, as if the air had been persuaded to become a pond with a slippery bottom just above his house. He sent a second balloon and a third, and he knew better than to do a fourth because repetition is an invitation to being used. He folded the small cables and set the things in the drawer, then took them back out and wiped them with a cloth so they would know he had not put them away in anger. The line of wet on the lawn came and went like a child learning a loop, a string, making a swing, a hammock, a knot, a mess. Sometimes it curved far into the neighbor's side, and then, as if ashamed of that trespass, the next morning it kept strictly to his. He did not knock on the neighbor's door and ask whether their grass had learned anything it wanted to share. The birds, who know what power lines are saying and take petty revenge by sitting on the very message, behaved as they always had. He wanted a bird to be his monitor, and it refused. That refusal was a kind of favor. He learned the storm S pacing so well that his body began to make its tiny preparations without his asking. He would put a cup down and check to see if the breath of the house had moved the ring of water, and then put the cup right back where it had been, because the cup was not his to be using to understand the house. He would step into the hall during the exhale as a person steps onto a ferry, not because of belief or because it will save a life, but because it will keep a story from embarrassing itself by requiring gods. He would lay his phone face down on the desk under a note that read plainly, "Let it pass," and try not to become the sort of person who writes notes to himself out loud. He became quiet in the way a person doth, who has learned that any noise he adds will be used against him by a room that likes to echo. In the supermarket, he kept his hands behind the handle of the cart and did his route in the old order. The woman at the register had a good voice for announcing totals. He liked the way it made the smallest thing feel paid for. He carried his sacks home and listened at the door because that is what he did now, as if the house had changed locks on him in a courteous way and was waiting to be asked before it set them back. On a late afternoon with yellow light that had found its way out of a January that did not usually share, he stood in the porch and watched the wet line try a half circle before giving up. A snowblower somewhere complained. A man called to a dog with a tone he knew well, a plea hidden in a command so that the man would be spared the shame of having begged a pet. Inside, an appliance chirped in the sound a machine uses when it wants you to know that a cycle has ended and was pleased with itself for having worked hard. He went in and opened the dishwasher and felt steam that had a new weight to it, as if it had learned manners from the house and remembered to put a napkin in its lap. He looked down at the tiles and thought of isobars, of lines that guide air into behaving as if it believes in being drawn. He crouched and felt the grout for damp. The grout was grout. The house had not turned into the bottom of a lake. He stood and moved his attention to the small things that are supposed to keep a person from making a poem of his life. Mail arrival times, the weight of a water bill, the kind of quiet a cat makes when it is about to leave a room without asking permission or offering explanation. Then a night came when the spiral did not just settle, it decided. Near the middle of the night, the eye found the precise dimensions of the house and stopped. Every return outside that line began to move around it as if honoring a shared agreement. The house exhaled and held its breath in a long, careful hold. Papers lifted and stayed lifted until they learned how to hover without help. The lantern-style light on the front porch swung just once, then stood as if polite company had come and it had remembered itself. The map on the screen stopped being a place that could be zoomed. He could see his roof in the same way he could see the letters on a paper he placed on the desk. When he blinked, the lines of the house remained present to the eye. He closed his eyes and saw, against that kind dark a human head makes, the neat square of the roof and the way the yard backed itself around a small, honest porch. He sat in the chair and rested his hands on the arms and gave the house something to measure itself against. He stayed that way for long enough that his back decided to be a back and not a string. He knew how to wait. The work of counting makes a waiting man foolish. He did not count. He put his mouth around the quiet the way you put your mouth around a cold cup to let it know you have not forgotten what it can do. The data after that was useless. The station at the fence wrote a line that had no rise or fall. The anemometer confessed the same 3 clicks, then learned silence that could have been peace or fear. The balloon sound code corrupted itself the second it rose to roofline as if it had been spoken to in a language it had no right to understand. The lamp behaved. The quivering papers finally gave in to gravity like people at the end of a prayer. He went down to the basement because of the honest superstition that basements keep the parts of a house that know about anchors. The furnace kept its promise. The water heater showed its trust with its small, steady tone. The blue bike hanging from the ceiling by 2 hooks looked embarrassed. The concrete had learned that winter is a teacher you cannot flatter. He stood with his palm flat on the cinder block as if to learn what the wall had learned. The wall admitted work and gave back the simple minoress a gift of cool. Back upstairs, the room waited for him. He had expected something like panic by then, a voice that would make him laugh at himself just to have a human sound to put under what the house had begun to do. There was no voice. The spare room had become a place where a person could keep still for as long as he could invent a reason to sit. He inventoried reasons. He came up empty in the way a careful boy with an empty jar still pretends to smell what isn't in it. He did not tell anyone. Words would only ask the house to perform. He had lived long enough to know the difference between telling his request and telling his proof. He had no one to prove himself to that he trusted with rooms. He could have sent a screen grab of the radar to a group that liked to be reassured that phenomena existed that would not be explained by Sunday dinner. Did not. He drank water and put the glass down without making a mark on the desk and waited for the house to take another breath. In the morning, the eye let go, not far. Just enough for him to make the bed, which was a courtesy. The wet line on the lawn had not advanced and had not retreated. The porch steps looked as if a child had traced them with a damp finger. He stood on the top step and held his hands in front of him like a person demonstrating that they have brought no trouble into a room. He looked up through the dull winter sky and resented the airplane, drawing its pale line as if the world would agree to remain pinned to a straight. Work wanted him, and he gave it a version of himself that did not cost much. He sat at his own small desk in a room that had no patience with weather and moved numbers around and answered to messages needing apology with the kind of clean sentence that says they're sorry without making a reader responsible for washing a person. He came home with his mouth wanting to be quiet and gave it that. The spare room waited. The map looked as if it had always lived in his house and would stop breathing if he unplugged it, which was a thought he should not have allowed. He set his palm lightly to the desk to break the spell he was not supposed to believe in. Then came a week, unlike other weeks. The loop did not just repeat. It learned his sleep. He would feel drowsy at the same moment the return slid over the lake and then woke to take in his block. The pulses of the fence kept him company when a human body tries to be brave by reminding itself it is a set of sighs. He kept a small station on the porch that marked the sound that thin air makes around a house not accustomed to water, and recorded it and then erased it because no one would need that sound again if the house stopped learning it. It was absurd he was careful. He was the only person present on a night like the first dusting of real snow. Impossible to call whether the weather would commit. The house tightened around him like a sail taking wind and then dropped it. He went to the door and put his hand on the knob and then took it off. Not because he feared where the knob would lead, but because he had given the house a promise when he turned the clock face to the wall. Do not perform for me and I will not perform for you. He broke that promise and opened the door. Outside, the air felt sifted, as if a screen had been set between the yard and the sky and asked to remove what kept winter from showing its spine. The wet line bent around the tree and for the first time since he had noticed it, closed, a neat ring around the house, like a child's chalk line. He stepped down one stair. The air pressed his shins gently. He took one more step and felt the floor of sky at the height of his hat. He held that with his back, the way a man holds a door for a stranger out of habit and not out of virtue. He stood on the porch in the middle of the night with a ring of water, learning a new boldness and the sky taking its proper job upon itself just above the roof. And he did not say any name for what he suspected he was inside of. He went back in and shut the door and set his hand on the wood as if it were a dog he had kept too much company with. After that, he stopped opening the door during the hour of breath. He allowed the house to do its small trick and tried to do the older trick of letting a trick be just that and not a rule. The refrigerator learned a new interval and he decided to live with it. The light over the kitchen sink flickered in time with a cycle and he replaced the bulb and the new bulb obeyed the same cycle. He told himself he was not being watched by his house. He was living with it the way people live with old relatives, whose slow breathing they match out of kindness. He developed a tenderness toward the map he had once kept like a faith. He did not blame it for becoming a mirror. He turned the brightness down to keep from seeing himself seated in the reflection the way a cheap tailwind sees you and needs to show you that your face is not the authority in this kind of light. He kept his pencil. He drew neat little circles on paper he would not show to anyone, as if he could keep the old skill alive by pretending marks on paper could compete with what an eye does when the room asks it to be a witness. The loop tightened once more in that season's late ache. It held its breath for longer. It learned to relax without losing its place. He matched it unwilling at first, then with a workeress fatigue that forgives itself for repeating what it has been taught when a job asks. He sat with his body set square and his hands visible and the house breathed slow. On the screen, the eye fixed again, then drifted a hand's breadth, then returned. It became not a storm, not a phenomenon, not even a map. It became his room, sending itself a picture of its own quiet and asking whether it had remembered to keep him in it. He told it yes, without moving his mouth. He slept in his bed some of those nights and left the door open and let the breath of the house pass down the hole without the kindness of the salt lamp to make it pretty. He named nothing. He woke at the right times without deciding to. He came to see that the house wanted something that might be called company from him in a shape he could give. He could be present. He could keep his hands in his lap and nod at a sound not asked for. He could be the person to whom a map might confess it had grown ashamed of being only good at scale. Before the first real thaw came, he took the clock down and set it on its back and traced a faint circle around it with a pencil. He wrote no word. He hung it again and left its face to the wall like a courtesy extended to a colleague you need not look at, to know he is going to do what he does. The tick continued, gentle and obedient, counting something in plaster he could not see. He sat in the chair and felt the house take a breath that matched his. On the screen, the return halted. The eye fixed. The map stopped being mapped and became the picture of a quiet room where a person had held still long enough that a house thought it could learn how to breathe from him. After that, on nights when the return did not arrive, he felt a small hunger and did not feed it. He let the cups be cups and the battery drawer be a drawer. He went to sleep like a man whose house was practicing a song in the next room and did not require applause. If the radio friend called to speak about a front coming round the lake with a spine to it, he answered with pleasure and kept off the part of his life that did not belong to a radio. He walked to the end of the block and stood with the ring of sidewalk under him. He looked back at the house and could not see anything that would tell a person what had been happening inside. Leaked that houses deserved their privacy. When at last the night came with a wind big enough to blow old rappers into the yard and make the chimes talk about their joys and injuries, the loop did not appear. He kept the lamp turned down anyway. He did his small chores of readiness. He set the pencil by its notebook. He put the glass where the breath of the room would not have to pick it up. Sat. The house, proud at itself for a season's work, took one long breath and let it out with a decorum no person could have taught it. On the screen, the county returned to its proper plainness. The lake and the highway took back their simple work of being boundaries. The eye lifted. The map practiced being a map. He left the clock to the wall, because a man ought to honor what he is asked a thing to become. He kept his hand on the table a long time that night, palm down, as if the wood were a back you could teach to unclench. He whispered nothing. The house breathed as houses do when they have been treated fairly. He learned the silence he knew he would spend the rest of his small life trying not to interrupt. Outside, the chimes moved from one sound to another and called that time. The salt lamp warmed its corner. The pages on the desk did not lift. He waited. He did not greet. The room remembered him without asking for his name.